My son was dying, and only my kidney could save him. The surgeon was preparing to operate when my daughter-in-law leaned in and whispered, "It's your duty as his father." I had already signed the papers. My body lay stiff on the cold operating table, when suddenly the door burst open. My 9-year-old grandson rushed in, his voice trembling as he cried out, "Grandpa, I'll tell the truth about why my dad really needs your kidney." The entire medical team froze. Before I begin, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where in the world you are listening from. The bright white lamp above me was almost blinding. My whole body felt heavy, as if I was chained to that table. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only rhythm in the room, yet every beat struck like a hammer in my chest. I could hear the faint clinking of metal instruments as the nurse arranged them. I could hear the shuffle of Dr. Evans turning pages in my medical file. And I could hear the faint whisper of my daughter-in-law, Rebecca, speaking to her parents through the glass window, though her eyes never left me. Her gaze was sharp, pressing, as if she was silently saying, "Do it, don't hesitate." I had already signed the consent form. My shaky signature on that paper was now my unchangeable commitment. A nurse held the syringe, and the anesthesia inside glimmered under the light. I closed my eyes, trying to take a deep breath, but my chest felt tight, like a heavy stone pressing down on me. I thought of Adam, my firstborn son, lying weak in the next room. I had spent my life working for him, providing for him, protecting him, and now he was waiting for me to give him life once more, but in a different way. I told myself this was my duty as a father. I had no choice, but deep inside, I felt an emptiness, a nameless fear I could not explain. Then Mario's voice cut through it all. His sneakers squeaked against the tile floor as he ran in, his little face pale but determined. The nurse behind him tried to stop him. Her voice panicked, but Mario would not be stopped. He stood at the edge of the table, clutching something tightly in his small hand. His eyes, wide and wet with tears, locked on mine as his words echoed through the room. "Grandpa, I'll tell the truth about why my dad really needs your kidney." The silence was complete. Even the doctors seemed frozen, waiting for what would come next. The moment Mario's trembling voice filled the room, my mind spun backward through the years. I am 67 now, but the weight of time feels much heavier on my shoulders. My wife Anna has been bedridden for more than a decade. She spends her days in an old wheelchair, silent, her eyes fixed on a distance I cannot see. Sometimes she sighs, but most of the time she says nothing at all. I used to sit beside her in the evenings, take her hand, and ask, "Anna, are you tired of this life?" She never answered, only blinked slowly, and I was left to wonder if she understood me, or if I was simply talking to myself. That house had been my entire world. Its walls had heard every sacrifice I ever made for my 2 sons, Adam and Brandon. I woke before dawn for years, working double shifts in a steel factory. When others went home, I stayed on, hauling heavy loads, repairing broken machines, and taking every extra hour of work I could get. My hands turned rough and scarred. My back ached every night, but I never complained. I only wanted Adam and Brandon to have a life better than mine, a future free from the exhaustion that carved lines into my face long before old age did. Adam was my pride. Strong, tall, with a laugh that used to fill our home, he worked in construction, and every evening he would walk in with dust on his clothes and a grin on his face. But that strength faded. First it was tiredness, then a cough, then pale skin and hollow eyes. I felt a terrible fear the day he admitted to me that he was urinating blood. I put my hand on his shoulder and begged him to tell me everything, but he only gave me a weak smile and said, "Don't worry, Dad. It's probably just from work." Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, had already entered our lives by then. At first I thought she was a blessing. She was beautiful, spoke softly, and seemed devoted to Adam. She brought him medicine, cooked his meals, and reminded him about his pills. Neighbors praised her, saying I was lucky to have such a caring daughter-in-law, and I wanted to believe them. But sometimes I caught her eyes when she thought no one was looking, cold, calculating, as though she carried a secret I could not reach. Once I saw her whispering on the phone late at night in the backyard. Her voice was hurried, almost urgent. When I asked her who she was talking to, she jumped, then laughed nervously. "Just a friend, Dad. Go back to sleep." I tried to shake the unease away, but it stayed with me like a shadow, and as Adam's health continued to decline, that shadow only grew darker. Adam grew weaker with each passing month. His strong arms that once lifted heavy beams at the construction site now trembled just from holding a glass of water. His voice, once full of laughter, became soft and strained. I often sat beside him, watching him try to smile for me, but I could see the exhaustion behind his eyes. My heart broke a little more every day. Rebecca began to take complete control of his care. She brought medicine, watched over his meals, and spoke to the doctors with a kind of authority that made it seem like she knew better than all of us. She reminded Adam when to take his pills, and she never let anyone else touch his food or drinks. At first, I told myself this was devotion, the loyalty of a wife who truly loved her husband. But sometimes I would notice the way her hand lingered on the bottles, how she would quickly tuck something away if anyone came too close. And whenever I asked questions, she would answer with that same sweet smile as if to calm me, though her eyes betrayed something harder underneath. One evening I stepped out into the yard for air. The night was quiet except for the creak of Anna's wheelchair behind me. That was when I heard Rebecca again, speaking on her phone in a low, rushed whisper. "Don't worry," she said. "Everything is going according to plan." My blood ran cold. I stepped closer, and she quickly turned around, her eyes wide for a moment before she forced a smile. "Oh, Dad," she laughed nervously. "Just a friend from work. Nothing important." She slipped past me into the house, leaving me standing there with unease pressing against my chest. Brandon, my younger son, was different. He didn't talk much, but he showed his care through quiet actions. He worked as a plumber and electrician, and though his own life wasn't easy, he often came by with a bag of groceries or tools to fix something in the house. He would look at me with serious eyes and say, "Dad, don't wear yourself out. You've carried enough." I always waved him off, but I could see the worry etched into his face. And then there was Mario, my little grandson. He was 9, with innocent eyes and the boundless energy of childhood. He often stayed with me, running around the yard with his little toy cars. He would chatter about school, about his games, but sometimes his words made me stop. One day, he looked up at me and said softly, "Grandpa, I heard Mom talking on the phone last night. She said something about medicine for Dad, but I didn't understand." I ruffled his hair and told him not to worry. "Your mother is just asking about your father's treatment." But even as I said it, a seed of fear began to take root deep inside me. Adam's health continued to decline until the day the doctors called us into their office. I sat across from Dr. Evans, the head surgeon, as he spread Adam's test results across the desk. His expression was grave. "Mr. Jones," he said, "we've run every possible comparison. You are the only compatible donor for Adam. Without your kidney, he may not survive." The words hit me like a hammer. I stared at the papers, at the rows of numbers and medical terms I barely understood. My throat felt dry, and before I could respond, Rebecca placed her hand on the desk, leaning forward with a sharp look in her eyes. "Then it's settled," she said firmly. "You'll do it. You have to. It's your responsibility as his father." I froze. The words cut into me, not as a plea, but as an order. I turned to Adam, who was slumped weakly in his chair, his skin pale, his eyes full of trust. His hand reached for mine, trembling, and his voice came out faint but heavy with need. "Dad, I know you'll save me." I wanted to speak, to reassure him, but no words came. The weight pressing on me was unbearable. That was when Rebecca's parents entered, as if on cue. Mr. Collins, tall but frail, cleared his throat and said in a gravelly voice, "In our family, parents always sacrifice for their children. That's what honor means." Mrs. Peterson followed quickly, her eyes cold and sharp. "If you refuse, what will people say? That you let your own son die? That you don't deserve to be called a father?" I sat there with my hands on my knees, staring at the floor. Their words wrapped around me like chains, pulling tighter with each breath. I felt cornered, powerless, as though every eye in that room was demanding the same thing. Adam's weak voice, Rebecca's unyielding tone, her parents' harsh judgment, it all pressed down on me until I could no longer breathe. That night, I carried a bowl of soup to Anna, as I always did. Her wheelchair creaked as I pushed her to the table. I set the bowl in front of her and sat down heavily, watching her sip in silence. I wanted to ask her what to do, to tell her how suffocated I felt, but she only blinked at me, her lips pressing into a thin line. The words died in my throat. When I stepped outside, Mario was in the yard, pushing one of his toy cars along the cracked cement. He looked up at me with those wide, innocent eyes and asked softly, "Grandpa, What if someone is making Dad sick with medicine? The spoon I still held nearly fell from my hand. My heart skipped a beat. I forced a smile for him, but inside, fear grew like a shadow that would not leave me. The days that followed were heavy, each one pressing on my shoulders like a load I could no longer carry. I thought back over the years, over all the sacrifices I had made as a father. The long nights in the factory when my hands blistered from the machines. The double shifts I took so Adam and Brandon would never go to bed hungry. The mornings when I dragged my aching body back home, just in time to walk them to school. I never wanted them to suffer as I had. My hands had become rough and scarred, my back bent with age before its time, but I never once regretted the work. I was their father, and I believed every drop of sweat I gave was worth it for their future. But now, as I watched Adam wasting away in his hospital bed, I wondered if all those years had been enough. He had tricked. You used me his whole life, and now he looked at me with the same pleading eyes he had when he was a boy, begging me to save him. My heart ached with love for him, but there was something else pressing inside me, something colder. Doubt. Fear. Brandon came to visit often, quiet as always. He worked long hours as a plumber and electrician, but still, he never came empty-handed. Sometimes he brought bread fresh from the bakery, sometimes fruit from the market. He would fix the squeaky ceiling fan or replace a broken bulb without being asked. One evening he put his rough, grease-stained hand on my shoulder and said in his low voice, "Dad, don't destroy yourself. You've carried this family on your back long enough. I don't want to see you collapse." I wanted to believe him, but I only smiled faintly and shook my head. Your brother needs me more than ever. I can't let him down. Mario, my little grandson, was the light in those dark days. He came often with his small backpack, dropping it in the corner before running to the yard with his toy cars. His laughter was usually a comfort, but lately his words carried weight beyond his years. One afternoon, while pushing his toy along the cracked cement, he looked up at me and asked, "Grandpa, what happens if someone takes the wrong medicine? Can it make them sick?" The question struck me like a knife. I knelt beside him, forcing a calm voice. "Why do you ask that, Mario?" He lowered his head, tracing circles with his car. "Sometimes I hear Mom on the phone at night. She says things about Dad's pills. I don't understand, but it sounds strange." I patted his hair gently, telling him not to worry, but inside, unease gnawed at me like a slow fire. His words echoed in my mind long after he went home, feeding a fear I could no longer ignore. The unease that had taken root in my chest grew with each passing day. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that Rebecca was simply doing her best to care for Adam, but the cracks in her mask were becoming harder to dismiss. One afternoon, I arrived at the hospital carrying a small container of food I had prepared. Adam was lying weak in bed, his skin pale, his arms thin and covered with IV lines. Rebecca sat by his side, her expression tight as she watched the IV drip. She didn't notice me right away. I stopped in the doorway, and in that moment I saw her slip a small pill into a glass of water. Her movement was quick, practiced, as though she had done it many times before. I cleared my throat, and she jumped slightly, spilling a little water on the floor. Her eyes flashed with something sharp before she forced a smile. "Oh, Dad, it's just a supplement for his kidneys. The doctor prescribed it." I nodded slowly, but unease twisted inside me. Later, when Adam was resting, I pulled Dr. Evans aside and asked him in a low voice, "Doctor, did you prescribe any new supplements for Adam's kidneys?" He looked surprised, checked the file, and shook his head. "No, we haven't changed his medication. What he has is sufficient." His words made the ground shift beneath me. If Rebecca was lying about the pills, what was she really giving Adam? That night, Mario came over to my house. He was quieter than usual, his little backpack slung over his shoulders. He sat at the table, pulled out an old phone with a cracked screen, and looked up at me with wide, serious eyes. "Grandpa," he said softly, "I want you to hear something." He pressed play, and Rebecca's voice filled the room. It was hushed, almost a whisper, but the words struck like a blade. "After the transplant, everything will be perfect. Don't worry, he won't dare refuse." My hands trembled as I held the phone. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would break through my chest. I looked at Mario, his small face pale but determined. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "I found it on Mom's old phone," he said. "I don't know what it means, but I thought you should know." I pulled him into my arms, my throat tightening. "You're very brave, Mario," I whispered, though inside my soul felt like it was collapsing. The words of that recording rang in my ears through the night. After the transplant, everything will be perfect. Perfect for whom? And why did she sound so certain I wouldn't refuse? The next morning, I tried to carry on as usual. I woke early, made myself tea, and went to the market for a few things. But the recording Mario had played haunted me with every step. Rebecca's words, cold and certain, echoed in my mind. After the transplant, everything will be perfect. I could not stop wondering what she meant. That evening, Brandon came by. His shirt was worn, his hands still stained with grease from a day's work. He didn't greet me with his usual calm nod. Instead, he shut the door behind him, his face tense. "Dad," he said in a low voice, "I followed Rebecca yesterday." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean you followed her?" He opened his old phone and showed me a series of blurry photos. In them, I could see Rebecca in the hospital parking lot. She was glancing around nervously, holding a small bag. A man in a black jacket and a cap pulled low over his face approached her. They exchanged the bag for an envelope. "I took these," Brandon whispered. "I couldn't hear what they said, but I saw everything. She gave him medicine. He gave her money." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The images blurred in front of me as my hands shook. "Are you sure about what you saw?" I asked, my voice almost breaking. Brandon's jaw tightened. "I wouldn't bring this to you if I wasn't sure. Something's not right. I'm afraid for Adam, Dad. I think she's hurting him instead of helping." His words pierced me. Part of me wanted to believe he was wrong, that Rebecca couldn't possibly betray her husband like that. But another part of me, the part that had been watching her closely for months, knew he was right. The unease, the pills, the whispers, Mario's questions, everything was falling into place like pieces of a terrible puzzle. That night, we all gathered for dinner. Rebecca cooked, smiling sweetly as she placed food on the table. "Dad," she said, warmly, "you should eat well and keep up your strength for the surgery." Her tone was kind, but her eyes flickered with something colder when they met mine. Adam sat across from me, too weak to eat much, but he tried to smile. "Thanks, Dad," he whispered. "I know you'll save me." His trust was like a dagger in my chest. Brandon barely touched his food. He kept watching Rebecca, his eyes sharp, as though he was trying to peel back the mask she wore. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the clinking of spoons against plates. I sat there, forcing myself to swallow, but every bite tasted like ash. The pressure on me grew heavier with each passing day. Rebecca was relentless. She came to my house early in the mornings, often without knocking, carrying stacks of medical papers that I could hardly understand. She would place them firmly on the table, tapping her finger on the lines of text. "It says here clearly, Dad," she would insist. "You are the only match. If you delay, Adam's life is in danger. Don't you want to save your son?" Her words were like nails driven into my chest. I wanted to shout that of course I wanted to save him, that I would do anything for my boy. But something in the way she said it, sharp and demanding, left me feeling cornered rather than comforted. I would nod weakly just to make her leave, but the unease never left me. That evening, her parents arrived again. They walked into my house as though it belonged to them. Mr. Collins sat in my favorite chair, clearing his throat before speaking in a slow, deliberate tone. "When I was young, my grandmother sold all her land to save her son's life. A parent must be ready to give everything. It is your turn now." Mrs. Peterson leaned forward, her eyes cold. "And if you refuse, what will the neighbors say? They'll whisper that you didn't love your son enough. They'll say you let him die." Their words wrapped around me like chains. I wanted to tell them to leave, to demand why the burden was only mine, but my throat closed up. I lowered my head and nodded faintly. They smiled, satisfied, while I sat there feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my life. That night, after they had gone, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the old wooden table in my dimly lit room, the oil lamp flickering. My rough hands trembled as I picked up a pen and began to write. I wrote my will. I left the small house to Brandon, the few savings I had to Mario, and some keepsakes for Anna, though she could no longer speak to thank me. Each word I wrote felt like carving away a piece of my soul. When I was done, I folded the paper carefully and placed it inside a wooden box where I kept old family photographs. Outside, the rain fell hard against the roof. I sat listening to it, my head in my hands, wondering if I was walking willingly into a trap I could not escape. The morning of the surgery arrived with a heaviness I could not shake. I had barely slept the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Adam's pale face, Rebecca's sharp stare, and Mario's trembling words. Still, when the ambulance came to take me to the hospital, I climbed inside, clutching a small bag with a change of clothes and an old handkerchief that Anna had embroidered for me years ago. The siren wailed as the city blurred past, but inside me there was only silence, as though my heart had already resigned itself. At the hospital, the air smelled sharply of disinfectant. They wheeled me down a long, cold corridor. The squeak of the gurney wheels echoed in my ears, each turn of the hallway pulling me closer to a fate I wasn't sure I wanted. Rebecca walked just behind us, her heels clicking steadily against the tiles. When I turned my head, I saw a faint smile playing on her lips. It wasn't relief or gratitude. It was triumph, as if victory was already hers. Her parents were waiting at the reception. Mr. Collins had dressed in a stiff suit, and Mrs. Peterson wore a bright red dress, as though they were attending some grand celebration instead of a surgery. They greeted the doctors warmly, shaking hands and thanking them as though this was an arrangement they had long been preparing for. I watched them from the gurney, clutching my bag tightly against my chest, and felt more like a prisoner being led to judgment than a father trying to save his son. Before they took me into the operating wing, they allowed me to see Adam. He was lying in a hospital bed, thinner than ever, his face pale and drawn. His eyes opened when he saw me, and he tried to smile. "Dad," he whispered weakly, "thank you. I know you'll save me." My heart twisted. I took his cold hand in mine and whispered, "I'll do everything I can, son." But my voice shook. He closed his eyes again, trusting me completely, unaware of the shadows moving behind him. As they pushed me toward the operating room, Brandon came running down the hallway. His shirt was damp with sweat, his hair disheveled, his face red with desperation. "Dad, wait!" he shouted, grabbing the side of the gurney. His eyes burned into mine. "Don't do it. Something isn't right. Please, I beg you, don't go through with this." I wanted to tell him I understood, that his fears echoed my own, but the words caught in my throat. The nurse pulled him back gently, and I was wheeled away, leaving him standing there with his fists clenched, his voice breaking as he called after me. The operating room was cold, brighter than any place I had ever been. The overhead lamps poured white light directly into my eyes, until I could barely keep them open. Nurses moved quietly around me, arranging metal instruments that clinked against each other, their sound sharp and metallic. A mask was placed beside me, the anesthesia ready. My body stiffened as if it already knew I might never wake again. Through the glass wall, I saw Rebecca standing with her arms crossed. She pressed her face closer, her eyes narrowing at me. When the nurse held up the consent papers, Rebecca made a quick hand gesture, urging me to sign again. I forced my trembling hand to move, and as the pen scraped across the paper, I felt as though I was signing away not just my kidney, but my very life. My blurred signature stared back at me like a death sentence. The heart monitor beside me beeped steadily, each beat echoing in my ears. Dr. Evans, the head surgeon, leaned over me with calm authority. "Everything is ready, Mr. Jones," he said. "Try to relax. We'll begin shortly." But there was no relaxation inside me. My chest rose and fell with shallow, unsteady breaths. I closed my eyes and thought of Adam, lying weak in the next room. I thought of Brandon, his desperate voice begging me to stop. And I thought of Mario, my little grandson, whose innocent words had carried warnings I hadn't wanted to hear. The memory of his voice, trembling but clear, replayed in my head. What if someone is making Dad sick with medicine? Just as the nurse prepared to inject the anesthesia, the door slammed open with a deafening crash. The entire room froze. Instruments rattled on the tray. A pair of forceps fell to the floor with a metallic clang, and a gust of air rushed in. Mario burst into the room like a small whirlwind. His sneakers were muddy, his uniform wrinkled, his little chest rising and falling rapidly as he gasped for breath. A nurse chased after him, shouting, "Child, you can't be in here! Stop at once!" But Mario didn't stop, his eyes, wide with fear, yet burning with determination, locked directly on me. "Grandpa!" he cried, his voice trembling but loud enough to pierce the sterile air. He clutched an old cell phone tightly in his small hand, his knuckles white. "I'll tell the truth about why my dad really needs your kidney." The entire medical team froze where they stood. The heart monitor's steady beep now sounded louder than ever, as though the machine itself understood the weight of what had just been said. Dr. Evans raised his hand sharply. "Stop everything," he ordered. His eyes narrowed at Mario. "Whatever you have to say it now." The silence that followed was unbearable. broken only by my grandson's trembling breath as he stepped forward. Mario's little hands shook as he held out the phone, but his voice carried through the silent room with surprising strength. "I have proof," he said. "I know why my dad is really sick." His thumb pressed the cracked screen, and suddenly Rebecca's voice filled the sterile air. Her whisper was sharp, unmistakable. "After the transplant, the test results will be perfect. Don't worry, he won't dare refuse." A chill spread through the room. My heart pounded so hard that I thought the monitor beside me would explode. The nurses froze mid-step, staring at each other in disbelief. Dr. Evans' eyes widened, and he immediately signaled for the anesthesia to be set aside. On the other side of the glass, Rebecca slammed her palms against the window. "Don't listen to him," she shouted, her voice shrill and panicked. "He's just a child. He doesn't understand anything." But the mask she always wore was slipping. Her face was pale, her eyes darting wildly, her composure cracking. Mario's voice broke, but he didn't stop. "There's more," he said. He tapped again, and another recording played. This time, it wasn't just Rebecca. I heard Mrs. Peterson's voice, cold and certain. "After this operation, we'll have enough data to sell the Medici. And abroad, this money will change everything." Gasps echoed around the room. One of the younger nurses covered her mouth with both hands. Dr. Evans's face turned hard, and his voice cut like steel. "Stop the procedure. This is no longer a surgery. This is a crime scene." At that moment, Brandon burst through the doors, his face red with fury, his chest heaving. He rushed past the staff and stood between me and the glass, pointing directly at Rebecca. "You poisoned him!" he shouted. "You made Adam sick so you could use him for your schemes." Rebecca's face twisted, her hands clawing at the window. "You're lying!" she screamed. "You're all against me. I did everything for my husband." Brandon's fists clenched, his voice trembling with rage. "Don't you dare pretend this is love. I saw you with my own eyes, handing over medicine in the parking lot. I have the photos. You were never helping him. You were killing him slowly." Rebecca's cries grew desperate, but no one believed her anymore. The truth was spilling into the room, unstoppable now. Mario stood at my side, tears running down his small face, but his eyes burned with courage. He had saved me, and he had saved his father. I lay there, unable to move, tears streaming into my ears. My family had been torn apart by betrayal, but in that moment, the lies were finally unraveling. Chaos filled the hospital corridor as the truth exploded into the open. Nurses whispered among themselves, some pale with shock, others furious that something so dark had been happening under their roof. Dr. Evans wasted no time. His voice cut through the confusion like a blade. "Call security. Call the police. This operation is over." Within minutes, uniformed officers arrived. Their heavy boots echoed against the tile as they pushed through the crowd that had gathered outside the operating room. Rebecca was still pounding on the glass, her face twisted with panic, her voice cracking. "It's not true. They're lying. I was trying to save my husband." But her words carried no weight anymore. Her mother, Mrs. Peterson, shrieked when the officers approached. "You can't arrest us. We did this for science, for money that would help everyone." Her cane struck the floor as she tried to block their path, but the officers moved past her, gripping her arms firmly. Mr. Collins looked defeated. His once stern face sagged as he lowered his head, saying nothing as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Rebecca screamed and fought as the officers restrained her. "Let me go! You don't understand. Without me, Adam will die." Her voice cracked into a sob, but no one reached for her anymore. From the hallway, Adam's weak voice could be heard. "What's happening? Why are you all shouting?" His words cut through me like a knife. He had no idea that the woman he trusted most had betrayed him so cruelly. I wanted to go to him, to hold his hand, to shield him from this storm, but I was still lying on the table, trembling with everything that had just been revealed. Brandon rushed to my side. He grabbed my hand tightly, his face pale, but his yes, fierce. "It's over, Dad," he said. "You're safe now. I won't let them hurt you again." His voice cracked, but there was determination in it that gave me strength. Mario climbed onto the stool beside me, clutching my arm with his little hands. His face was streaked with tears, but in his eyes I saw courage far beyond his years. "I couldn't stay quiet, Grandpa," he whispered. "I had to tell the truth." I turned my head slowly, looking at him through blurred vision. "You saved us all, Mario," I said in a hoarse whisper. Tears slipped down my face, not from fear anymore, but from relief. As Rebecca and her parents were led away in handcuffs, their voices still echoing down the hallway, I felt the weight lift from my chest. For the first time in months, I could breathe again. In the days that followed, the news spread like wildfire. Newspapers ran headlines about a drug trafficking ring exposed in our local hospital. Articles revealed that doctors, pharmacists, and even family members had been involved in testing illegal drugs under the guise of treatments and transplants. Rebecca, Mr. Collins, and Mrs. Peterson were named as key players in the scheme. Their photos appeared on the front page, their faces marked with shame. Reading those words filled me with a mix of rage and sorrow. I thought of Rebecca, the daughter-in-law I once believed was devoted to my son. I thought of the meals she served us with her sweet smile, the way she pretended to care for Adam. All of it had been a mask hiding her greed and betrayal. And I thought of Adam, my boy, who had suffered months of pain at the hands of the woman he trusted most. The guilt burned inside me, because even though I had seen the signs, I hadn't wanted to believe them. Adam began dialysis and a proper course of treatment under Dr. Evans' supervision. Slowly, his strength began to return. He looked fragile, but day by day there was color in his cheeks again. One afternoon, as I sat beside his bed, he reached for my hand, his eyes filled with tears. "Dad," he whispered, "I was blind. I trusted her, and I almost let you lose everything for me." I stroked his hair gently, just as I did when he was a boy. "What matters is that you're still here, son. We'll heal together." My voice cracked, but I meant every word. Brandon kept his promise to protect us. He stayed close, making sure I was never left alone with the weight of everything. Sometimes he didn't say much, but his presence was enough. His quiet strength reminded me that not all loyalty has to be spoken. Sometimes it is simply lived. And Mario, my little grandson, became the hero no one expected. The neighbors called him brave, and when he ran into my arms, he whispered, "I'm sorry I waited so long to speak up, Grandpa, but I'm glad I did it in time." I hugged him tightly, my tears soaking his small shoulders. "You saved us all, Mario," I told him, and I knew it was true. At night, I sat in my room with an old journal open before me. My hand trembled as I wrote the final lines. "Blood does not always make a family. Truth and loyalty do." I lost much, but I found strength I thought was gone, and I will never let anyone take my voice away again. I closed the book, listening to the soft rain outside. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, please subscribe to the channel and share it so others can hear it too. And tell me in the comments, if you were in my place, what would you have done? Your words might give strength to someone else who is struggling in silence.